My name is Alice Gosling. I'm the Strategic Development Director for the college, meaning I help to manage the team, or I manage the team who do all the alumni relations and fundraising for the college. And I'm a member of the governing body and sit on the and one of the college officers. So we can really help to ensure that alumni voices are heard, as all the fellows and the master would like it to be, as well as, of course, alumni contacting individuals directly. I just want to introduce Greg Neal, who's editing this publication for us. At the start of his career, Greg worked as a reporter and correspondent for Fleet Street newspapers, including The Times, The Guardian, The Observer, and The Sunday Telegraph. In 2000, Greg was appointed editor of BBC History magazine when it was launched by BBC Worldwide, the corporation's commercial arm. The magazine quickly established itself as Britain's best-selling title in the genre, a success recognized when Greg won 2 Editor of the Year awards from the British Society of Magazine Editors. Greg also edited Oxford Today for 3 years and has freelanced for Newsnight, BBC4's The World, and other titles, as well as having written an oral history for the University of York and is now working on a similar history for Birkbeck University. So Greg, we welcome you and thank you for talking us a little bit through the process that you're doing to develop this publication, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much indeed. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know how many people are with us this afternoon just yet. I think 1 or 2 people will be shuffling, as latecomers always do, electronically into the session. Alice has given you a very brief introduction to the idea that we should produce a new history of the college to celebrate our 400th anniversary in 2024. Let me take you through the process, what we've done so far, what we will be doing over the next 3 years, and the sort of book that you can, I hope, look forward to seeing in 4 years' time. Let's have the next slide, can we please, Ellen? Well, obviously we have a provisional title for the book, although ideas for improvements on a postcard, please, are always welcome. The idea that we're looking forward to in the book, The New History of Pembroke, is to show that it is a living college, that ours is a college that we are so proud of because it's got an illustrious past, but it is also very much a college which is looking always to the future. So the idea that we took the phrase from our very successful campaign Bridging the Centuries, which resulted in the building of the new quads the other side of Brewer Street, is one which we were using as the working title. I'm using, for my first illustration, a print of the new college as it was envisaged then. This is Logan's print from 1675, and the alert amongst you will realise, of course, that there is something possibly a little strange about it. Why is the gatehouse tower in the centre of the range? We'll come to that a little later. But that's one of the oldest physical representations we have of the college. And it will be one of those illustrations which we're using in the new book. Let's have a look at the next slide, please, Evan. Obviously, Pembroke is a college with a great history. We feel it's also a very proud college, proud of the steps it's taking and has taken already in the 21st century. So very much a question of a book which is about a living, developing community. And this is what we hope to give the flavour of in the book. Let's see the next slide. So, as I've already said, in 2024, we're celebrating the 400th anniversary of the college's foundation. And obviously, the anniversary would help focus our attention, not just amongst alumni, but in the wider world on the college's history, its achievements, and equally important, its plans for the future. And I know that Alice and her team in the development office bring you up to date as often as they can with the exciting plans that we have for the future and the part that alumni can play in it. So we're starting, as I say, a new history of the college. And with the next slide, we'll go through that. Now, why a new history? Well, I have beside me as we speak, one of the old copies of the only full-length history of the college so far published. This was, to give it its full title, History of Pembroke College, Oxford, Anciently Broadgates Hall, in which are incorporated short historical notices of the more eminent members of this house. Quite a mouthful. It's a lovely book, but it has all the strengths and the weaknesses of the classic Victorian institutional histories. Somewhat hagiographical, lots of diversions into the college's foundation, but obviously produced in the late 19th century. It omits vast amounts of the college history in the 20th and 21st centuries, years in which Pembroke really has developed in ways which would have astounded its 17th century forebears. Let's have a look at the next slide. Well, we're not doing this by ourselves. The college has signed a contract with the publishers Profile Editions, who are specialists in this field. And they have a long history of working with Oxbridge colleges and other institutions to produce attractive, authoritative books, which really are a joy to look at. In technical terms, it'll be a large hardback of about 200, 220 pages, illustrated in colour and black and white, and using modern techniques to produce a work which we believe will be both attractive and engaging. Let's look at the next slide, and we'll give you a few examples of what Profile have already done. This is their book on Christchurch. The next, Emma, will be the book they've done on Worcester College. And here's a slide from one on Mansfield, showing the kind of layouts that you can expect using pictures, which will obviously help tell stories. The text will be, hopefully, scholarly. It will be absorbing, but it will be accessible. This is not an academic work, except we hope that we'll, adhere to high academic standards, but it will be something that people can read with great pleasure. This is not one of those books which resides at all times on the top shelf of your library. It's something which we hope that it will bring you joy and pleasure when you read it, and your families will be also, I think, hopefully, interested in the story of the college in an attractive and accessible way that we produce it in the book. Let's have the next slide. Well, the history will bring two elements together. The narrative, telling the overall and chronological story of the college's birth and development. But it will also have thematic elements, which it seems to all of us who've been working on this project, that Pembroke really is not just about the buildings, beautiful and attractive though they are, or the treasures that the college has acquired over the years. The real treasure of Pembroke, of course, is the men and women who've helped make the college what it is over the last 400 years, and have shaped not only the college, but the contribution it's made not just to Oxford, the university, but also to wider British and international life. So, updating the 1897 book, our new history will tell the story of the modern Pembroke as the college faces the future. Let's have a look at the next slide. Many of you I know will be still mourning the memory of John Platt, for many years chaplain at Pembroke, and a good friend to many of us. In his long college career, he made it his job to welcome new students, to make them feel at home at the college and in the wider university. He died last December. I was fortunate enough to have several conversations with John and a lengthy interview with him shortly before he died, which will form part of the oral history archive that we're also assembling at the same time as producing the book. And John was very pleased when one of the last communications he received from college was that when we saw the first chapter that he had finished on his own long-standing plan to write a history of the college, that we will incorporate that in our own book, and also publish it as a separate pamphlet, a separate publication in the coming years. So John will be one of many distinguished correspondents and contributors who make up the book. We have people writing about architectural history, we have history of the gardens, we have also history of the intellectual life of the college. But perhaps most important, I think, for the second half of the 20th century and the 21st century sections of the book, we will have contributions from many alumni, many of those people who, whether as staff, students, and others have contributed to modern Pembroke. That is terribly important because, of course, the readership will be largely those who've been at the college in the second half of the 20th century or beyond. And so we will very much skew the book to recognise the contributions of the modern era of Pembroke alumni. Let's have a look at the next slide. Well, apologies for those of you who know this, but I think it might be useful if we just reminded ourselves in very brief outline form of the college history. Now, Pembroke in some ways is a relatively modern college in terms of the history of Oxford University. If you believe the claims sometimes put forward by University College, that it can date its foundation to 1000 AD, or perhaps the rather more supported claims of Balliol and Merton College, Oxford begins round about the middle of the 13th century. But before then, scholars, many of them coming from the continent, had established Oxford as a centre for learning and for teaching. And frequently this was based on halls, buildings where students and their teachers lived. And one of these halls, Tigrim, eventually Broadgates Hall, was situated on that part of Oxford where Pembroke is now. Broadgates Hall, by the end of the 16th century, was one of the surviving halls where legal students of law came to study. And the main site that the college occupies now includes, as the name of the building suggests, all that is left of old Broadgates Hall. Pembroke also has very much strong links to some of the other halls that survived right up until the middle of the 16th century. Here is, I suppose, the next slide, the two people most associated with the foundation of Pembroke College, Richard Whitrick and Thomas Tesdale. Tesdale was an Abingdon merchant, Whitwick a Berkshire clergyman. And the two of them had the idea which became Pembroke College. Tesdale was particularly concerned that boys from Abingdon should have a college at Oxford to which they could be directed. Whitwick was concerned that a new college should carry forward the traditions of Oxford scholarship. John Platt told me that his own researches revealed that for a long time it was quite possible that some of the monies being bequeathed towards a new college could have ended up in Balliol. I think we probably agree that they probably have enough funding to this day. So the money came to the new college Pembroke. And in 1624, the new college became a reality. And of course, a new college requires a new coat of arms. And here we are with the next slide. Some biographical details of Whitwick and of Tesdale. Now, as most of you know, the college takes its name from the third Earl of Pembroke, William Herbert, who was Chancellor of the University of Oxford at the time. What you may not know, that there is a strong element of continuity with Broadgates Hall, in that Thomas Clayton, the last principal of Broadgates, became the first Master of Pembroke. Here's the new college arms in the next slide. Well, the college arms, as you probably know, reflects its foundation. The rose and thistle echo King James I of England, who was also, of course, VI of Scotland, unified thrones, and the three lions on the coat of arms are from the arms of the Earl of Pembroke. Let's have the next slide. Well, a brief thumbnail history of Pembroke has to reflect the fact that we had a turbulent beginning, because within 2 decades, the college was caught up in the civil wars of the 1640s. And during this time, of course, Charles I made Oxford his capital for much of the war. And college treasures, not just from Pembroke, were seized to help pay the king's forces. And this turbulent beginning was echoed at the end of the Civil War, when, with the victory of the parliamentarian forces, many pro-monarchist heads of house in Oxford faced removal from office. So Henry Whitwick, master from 1647 to 49, was replaced briefly by Henry Langley, but with the restoration in 1660 of Charles II, he was restored to his office. And an unbroken line of masters can be traced from that day to this. Let's have the next slide. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is something of a mystery about the early buildings of Pembroke College. This is Logan's print, the first large-scale print we have of Pembroke College. It dates from 1675. And as you can see, there's something rather odd in that Logan was producing his work when it was envisaged that the new buildings of Pembroke would include a centrally situated gatehouse and tower. But the next print, next slide, Emma, shows what, of course, actually happened. The tower was moved. You can see in both of these two slides, incidentally, the fact that the site of the college, as we know it today, was occupied by extensive gardens, particularly to the on the eastern face. If you go back to the previous slide, Emma, you can see how wooded it was and how much of that garden area was given over to the production of food for the college. This also included recreational space. There was a pagoda in the far corner of the quad, what is now part of the hall, and you can also see there with a much more open space. Going forward, the 18th century saw perhaps the most notable addition of the period, the chapel. Here, incidentally, is a print from 1744 from Virtue's Almanac of Oxford, and you can see the appeal which is being made to the history of the college, with King James giving his assent for the foundation of the new college. So you can see the college is beginning to take shape as we know it today. And in the next slide, we see that at the same time, it was not just buildings that were shaping a new college, it was people. The 18th century is often seen as a period of stagnation at Oxford and Cambridge, in which very little work was done, a lot of drink was taken, but in fact this somewhat simplistic image is very misleading. In the 18th century in particular, Pembroke produced some of the most outstanding scholars, writers and jurists, thinkers indeed, of their generation. And Pembroke men, of course at this time it was a single-sex college, reflected on and helped shape ideas for a changing world, not just in Britain, but of course around the world. And perhaps the most illustrative figure of this would be James Smithson, the man who left Pembroke, where he was incredibly interested as a student in not just mineralogy, but also, as many others of his generation were, in the new ideas which led to not just the American Revolution and the French Revolution, but to ideas of social and political change. And of course, Smithson's tribute in his life in America was to found the Smithsonian Institution, and a plaque, of course, still exists in Pembroke today, marking his time at the college and the contribution he has made to the intellectual heritage of the world, something of which I think Pembroke can be justly proud. Let's have a look at the next slide. Now, many of you won't know Francis Jearn, but any history of Pembroke, as indeed a history of the university, will devote a lot of space to the influence of this man. Master from 1843 to 64, a dynamic figure in Oxford. He was Vice-Chancellor of the university as well, and he helped shape the modern college as the university itself reformed in the mid-19th century, moving from a university which up until 1829 was still very much a recognisably Anglican institution to the modern collegiate university we see today, in which research, particularly in the sciences, has led to Oxford becoming, in the opinion of most of us, the world's preeminent intellectual institution. But Jearn was a dynamic figure who also realised that Pembroke had to change itself as the university changed around it. It was his drive which saw the new hall with its splendid hammer beam roof erected. He also raised the money for a very large building programme which included the north face of the chapel quad with its bedrooms, its rooms, its extra facilities, which helped create one of the quadrangles which many observers in Oxford still believe, Betjeman for example, is one of the most attractive of all of Oxford's quadrangles. So we owe a lot to Francis Jearn. Let's go on. I thought this picture was very poignant when I came across it. Some of you will have seen from the Development Office the news about how the college is facing up to the coronavirus and the pandemic and what impact this has had. We know that the college has been closed largely, but we will be welcoming a very large intake of new students, both undergraduates and postgraduates, in just a week or two's time. This is the freshers intake in 1941, when, with the Second World War, just as in the 1914-18 Great War of Oxford faced great changes. Most of all, of course, the absence of large numbers of students. Both in 1914 and in 1939, university life across Britain was disrupted as elsewhere, and much smaller intakes. In many cases, students came up for just a term or two, and we've actually an interview in our oral history, which will provide useful copy for the book, on the extraordinary experiences of one of our students in 1944, coming up to Oxford and coming up to Pembroke, which was very much a ghost-like community, in which the memories of those students who'd gone off to fight, many not to return, of course, left its indelible mark upon the university and the college. Scenes we'll be looking forward to in a week or two's time very much reflect how the college is coming to terms with a new challenge. And I thought that this illustration would remind us that we've faced similar challenges before. We've risen to the challenge, and I've no doubt that Pembroke will do so. It is already doing so at the present time. Let's have a look at the next slide. So our contents and themes, after that brief thumbnail history of the college, will be the historical overview, taking the Pembroke story through the first 200 or 300 years, the growth of Victorian and early 20th century Pembroke, and then extraordinary changes in the second half of the 20th and the 21st century, which has made it college it is today. And this will be done through various themes being explored. Let's have a look at the next one. So we've already looked at some of the earlier representation of the places of Pembroke. We all know the beautiful college buildings, the quadrangles, ancient and modern, which make Pembroke what it is, the backdrop to the lives we spent as students and members of staff here. But it's not just about places, it's also about people, as the next slide will indicate. This is an 8-week photograph from a few years ago, and I think it shows the change in terms of social mores and attitudes, and the way in which Pembroke has adapted and changed over the last half century. The next slide shows that people have been important for Pembroke. Perhaps the most famous of all our former students on the left, Samuel Johnson, who came up in 1728, the great dictionary compiler, the great writer, a man who knew poverty as a student, fame and early celebrity as a great writer, but who became very fond of Pembroke and of Oxford and returned many times in his later life, and whose influence on the college shows the college's influence on the wider world. And in our illustration there, he sits alongside another representative of another generation of Pembroke students. This is Patience Agbabi, who came up in 1983, a poet and performance artist. And I hope that that gives some indication of the enormous richness that the college has produced in terms of its students, as well, of course, as its teachers. A college which can, for example, boast former master, Professor McCallum, one of the inventors of modern psephology, or, briefly, Tolkien, one of the great authors who's influenced generations of readers in the late 20th century. These are amongst the people who have made Pembroke what it is, and their stories, often told through their own voices, we hope will be an important part of the new book. Let's have a look at the next slide. So Pembroke, very much following tradition, here's a matriculation ceremony, and I think it was 1979, has also helped create traditions of the new Oxford, as the next slide will, I hope, amply illustrate. Much of the success that Pembroke has enjoyed on the river in recent years has, of course, been through the strength of our women's boats. And since 1979, with the admission of women to students at Pembroke, Pembroke has become ever more reflective of a modern world. So these are some of the stories that we will be telling through the voices of those who live through them. And the next slide. Now, I couldn't resist this when I saw it. I would very much like to get in touch with anyone who remembers this as being there, whether your hearing is still recovering from the late 1960s, when an up-and-coming pop group, The Who, played at one of our May balls. I think that some of the people are enjoying it. Some of the people seem a little bit less certain, but it's an example of the social history of the college, the cultural history of the college, which is as important, of course, as its intellectual life. And again, we're looking forward for your memories, your recollections, and your memorabilia, if you have any, which we can use as part of our celebration of our 400th anniversary and as part of the material for our new book. Let's have a look at the next slide. Now, we've also seen, of course, that Pembroke has played a part in the world. And I just thought that we would have two particular examples of this. There's a common link, of course, in that we have Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton here. But I wonder how many people know that we have produced, as we have Viktor Orban on the left-hand side there, Prime Minister of Hungary, and one of our most distinguished scholars, Zbigniew Palucki, who actually tutored Bill Clinton when he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. So Pembroke has made its mark not just in Oxford, not just in Britain, but on the wider world. And that will be one of the themes that we explore in the book. Let's have a look at the next slide. How can you help us? Well, as Alice said in her introduction, the new college history will be published in late 2023, in time for those Christmas presents. And we're commissioning, some commissions have already gone out, from past and present students and staff. So if you would like to help us with this project, to contribute towards particular themes, if you have memories, diaries, memorabilia, photographs, or other material, or you'd be happy to interview, please contact me directly or via the development office. If you want to contribute sections or towards sections, giving your own experience, it may be your period as a politics student or working for one of the societies, be sporting or cultural. It may be where you cut your teeth in JCR or Oxford Union debates. It may be stories about the arts at Pembroke, the arts in Oxford. We've a marvelous story from a Pembroke student who was unable to take part, although he was a very keen drama student, in a production which featured Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. As a consolation, he couldn't take part because his exams were considered to be more important. As a consolation, he said he had a kiss from Elizabeth Taylor. These are some of the stories which give you a flavour of what it was like to be a Pembroke student in the 1950s and 60s, and the stories will go on continuing. We have indeed a section already being planned, and for which we already have material on how Pembroke has come through the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. The memories of those people whose lives were disrupted, but whose Pembroke lives continued throughout these turbulent times that we've all been living through. Let's have a look at the next slide. There are various ways, and Alice will talk a little bit more in the Q&A at the end of this session, about how you can help by becoming a sponsor, a supporter, or an early subscriber to the book. And in this way, you can also help that Pembroke fulfills its potential for the next 400 years while receiving benefits such as, and they're listed here, VIP tickets to a 400th anniversary gala that we're organising, your name listed in the book, as well as some other goodies for you. I see a bottle of commemorative wine is listed amongst these attractions. Private tours of the archives. These are some of the inducements, if you like, we're hoping to offer if you can help support the book. But most, of course, we hope that you will enjoy this book. We hope that you will buy it. We hope will contribute to it. And we hope that what we are producing as part of our celebrations for the 400th anniversary, as part of the development steps that Pembroke is taking to address not only the difficulties that we face at the moment, but the bright future that we hope for in the coming decades, will be symbolized by the book Bridging the Centuries, the first 400 years of Pembroke College, Oxford. Thank you very much indeed. And I think the next slide will remind you that over the next months, whether it's through the e-bulletin or other means, the college will be letting you know about how we are celebrating our 400th anniversary, with details about the book as it takes shape and how you can be a part of it.